welcome to our, I think it's week four, week four, week four, week four of our series. We're working on problem solving together and making agreements tonight. And I'm Sarah Joseph. Thank you for joining me. Where do I want to begin? I was thinking about this today, and I feel like we've covered a lot of information in the past 4 weeks, 3 weeks together, and that when I was thinking about putting this presentation together for problem solving together and making agreements, I thought that it would be helpful to start with how we communicate with our adolescents, our teens. Because I think that a lot of issues around problem solving or trying to make agreements really comes down to our communication styles. So I thought that would be a good place to start. So let's jump in with 3 ways to kill communication with your teen. The first is failure to validate their feelings. So in week 1, we talked about how we can help, how we can validate, empathize with our teens. And I think that it's worth going back and watching again if you haven't got that down yet. Validation is really everything when it comes to feeling connected. And when I'm working with couples or working with families, I like to have them practice this validation quite a bit in session and then send them home to practice at home as well, because it's such it's such an amazing skill once you have it, but it does take a little bit of practicing because it often feels a bit scary or uncomfortable when you first start. So validating is really just connecting with the feeling behind the experience. And we do this to show another person that we understand what it's like to be them in that moment. That we understand what they're saying or how they're feeling, and that it's valid or it's okay for them to feel that way. Now, just because you're saying it's okay to feel that way doesn't mean that you agree with what they're feeling, right? All feelings are okay. Not all behavior in response to feelings is. So all feelings are okay, but the way that we react to our own feelings, the way that we show other people how we're feeling might not be okay, might not be appropriate or safe or kind, right? So just by validating a feeling doesn't mean that you're saying you're right about something or the other person's right. You're not agreeing, you're not condoning. You're just simply saying, I can see that you're upset, right? And that's a really important step simply because it makes the other person feel like you understand, you really get them. And if you flash back to last week when we were talking about connection, we can remember that is one of our most basic needs as humans, is that need to feel connection. And when someone can validate our feelings, it makes us feel heard and understood, and gives us that feeling of, oh, you really get me, right? I'm knowing, which is important. Okay, second way to kill communication with your teen is to overreact. Now, this is really more about us than it is about the teen. And it's about our fears and anxieties, about our own triggers and emotions. And it's about short-sightedness, really. When we overreact, we're not thinking about the long-term consequences of that reaction. We're simply focused on how I feel right now in this moment. And my overreaction is a way to try to hold on to some control, to mitigate some fear, to take control over, right? And so this is something we're going to talk more about next week, which I'm really excited about. One of my favorite topics is how to respond instead of react. How to help ourselves in those moments where we're feeling really triggered and overwhelmed by something, when the fear comes up, and how to manage that for ourselves so that we can respond in a way that's more effective in communicating, but also feels kinder, more connection, safer for our teens. So now, again, I think that when we overreact, we don't overreact on purpose. Nobody ever goes out of their way to overreact, right? We do it because we're feeling triggered and overwhelmed and we don't know what else to do. Or because it's something that's really like pushed a button, right? And so we're moving out of our logical brains into our emotional brain at that moment, and we're responding in that fight or flight kind of response. And so when we do that, we're really just, we're kind of backing our teen into a corner. We're making them put up their defenses, right? They have to shield themselves in order to get away from what we're doing. And that shuts down communication. Anytime you feel backed into a corner or like you have to defend yourself or protect yourself from the other person, it shuts down communication. So the last part is ways to kill communication with your teen is any kind of comments that are going to convey disrespect, criticism, or condescension. So our teens are really, as our kids move into teenagehood, adolescence, what's happening for them is that they're going through a stage where they're growing and they're trying to push away and get some more independence, right? And show us that they are independent, that they can handle the world, that they don't really need us, right? That they know everything. And so when you think about, when you were a teenager, I'm sure that you can come up with some examples from your own parents, your own childhood, of people speaking to you like you were too young and how that felt, right? When we speak to our children like they can't handle something because of their age, that they don't need to know because of their age, that they can't be part of a discussion or a decision-making process because of their age, that really is condescending, and it's not helpful in opening up communication and encouraging your child to work with you towards better solutions or cooperation. Also, again, disrespectful or criticizing. John Gottman says that criticism is one of the 4 horsemen of relationships. So basically one of the 4 worst things that you can do in a relationship is criticism. When we're criticizing, then what we're really doing is we're cutting down the other person. So they don't feel that connection, they don't feel that significance. So like we talked about last week, that's a really, really deep need. And if we're using criticism in our comments, then what we're doing is we're cutting that need, that we're cutting our ability off to reach that need, right? So, and when we're disrespectful, then that's what we get back. We get a lot of back talk. We get a lot of disrespectful comments, because again, respect is earned. It's not just given. And so in order to have respectful communications with our teens, we really need to show that we respect them and we can speak in respectful manner. Modeling is really important in this regard. So some teens took a survey and they gave us some advice, us parents, some advice on how to improve our communication with them. And this is what they said. They said they don't want lectures. They don't want to be talked down to. They would like us to listen to them and not talk over them. They don't want us to repeat ourselves. And Jane Nelson, who is the founder of Positive Discipline, she once said at a talk that I was at with her, that when you repeat yourself, you're basically telling the other person that they're too dumb to remember what needs to get done, or they're too dumb to remember. So it's really insulting to keep nagging or reminding or repeating yourself. Another point they had, some advice for us, was if they have the guts to tell us what they did wrong, don't be mad or overreact. And I think that's a really amazing point when we're talking about problem solving together, is that if we want our kids to come to us with problems, then we really need to make sure that they know that we're on their side, that we're not going to get mad at them, we're not going to overreact, that we're really going to listen, validate, and help, right? That we're going to understand how they could get into something, get into trouble, that we understand that mistakes happen, and that we're with them to help figure out how to remedy the mistakes that they've made, or help them get out of the trouble that they've gotten themselves into. That yeah, we're on their side, right? The last thing is, don't try to make us feel guilty by saying things like, I did it because you couldn't find the time. Um, Again, when we make statements like that, it sounds very condescending. And I don't know about you, but I grew up in a Catholic family, so guilt is a tool that was used by my mother, and it never made me feel very good. But it also didn't encourage me to want to cooperate, or it didn't motivate me. That's what I'm saying. So I think that those are some really good tips that we were able to get right from the teens themselves on how we could improve our communication with them. And here are some more tips. So I just wanted to give you some examples of effective communication and ineffective communication, because it's often easy to think that we're being effective until you see it on that list of ineffective communication, right? When you hear it coming out of somebody else's mouth and you go, oh yeah, that doesn't sound so good. So let's look at this and see what you think. All right, so the first one, if we start with the ineffective communication, would say, here's how it's going to be. Your bedtime is 10 p.m. and that's that, right? Where an effective way to communicate would be, let's make a deal. Okay. Another ineffective way would be, you think you're gonna make the rules here, where an effective way would be, here's how we do it. Right? Do you see it? There's often a tone that comes along with ineffective communication. The words are a piece of the puzzle, but we have to also mind our tone and our body language and facial expressions. And often when we're using ineffective communication, it really volleys us to use a condescending tone. So if you're not sure about the words, check in with how you're saying it. But on the other hand, some people are really good at managing their tone of voice to make it sound like they're being respectful, when what's coming out of their mouth isn't very respectful. Like, tough. I don't want to do a lot of things either. Right? It didn't sound very, it sounded pretty neutral, right? Where if I was using a nasty tone, it might sound like, tough. I don't want to do a lot of these things either, but I still got to do them, right? So a better way to say it would be, hey, let's negotiate. And again, we want to check our tone and our body language, because we can use effective words in ineffective ways when our body language says, I'm really pissed off. I'm really not going to budge on this, right? Okay, let's do one or two more here. Ineffective, you don't have to want to do it. You just have to do it. I've said that before. How about you? Yeah. hasn't worked. Hasn't worked for you. And then the other way, the more effective way to say it is, let's try this out for a day or a week or a month, whatever the timeline would work for you guys, and then we'll reevaluate, right? So this might be a really good one for schoolwork right now, right? I know that you don't have to want to do it, you just have to do it, has come out of my mouth since we've been on break. And so maybe a better way to approach schoolwork is, let's try this out. You know, maybe it's like working for an hour a day, and then we'll evaluate at the end of the week and see how that went. Whatever the work, you know, the schedule goes. All right, one more. Do it now, right? Not very effective. Where effective communication might be more, would you be willing to do the dishes now, right? So we can have clean plates to eat off of, or because that's what our agreement was. You can see that this list could be really helpful to have on hand when you're trying to figure out how to communicate more effectively. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have this as a handout. So I'll get that to Kate this week, and so when the video comes out, you'll get a handout of this as well. All right, so some steps for joint problem solving together. So again, problem solving is really, if we're gonna do this together, right, then we really need to take the stance of, I'm not the expert, I'm here to help, let's figure it out together, right? Not, I know the answer and I'm just gonna try to dig it out of you. That's not gonna work. So some steps for joint problem solving would be to state an observation, something like, so I noticed the dishes haven't got done yet. And then we could ask the teen what his view of the problem is and his feelings about it, right? And then express appreciation when they share. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and feelings. And then ask whether they would be okay with or willing to hear your feelings and view of the problem. So your perspective of the problem. And then after you've both shared, you'll have a better understanding of where you're at in reaching an agreement, right? And then you could ask, are we close to an agreement or far apart? And if you're close, then you could skip right to, would you be willing to try blank for a week or a day? And then we'll come back and reevaluate and see how it's working. But if you're far away, then you'll brainstorm some solutions together. And teens are quite good at thinking out of the box to come up with ideas. So it's nice to get their input and ask them what they think the solution can be. And I think I mentioned before that if we haven't done this with our teens before, that sometimes their answer is, I don't know, because they think it's a trick, right? Or their brains, we haven't set them up to have this skill of brainstorming for solutions. So sometimes it takes a little bit of practice before they get good at this. So just, again, don't quit after trying this one time and your teen kind of brushes it off like they don't know what to do or how to do it, or they don't want to do it with you. Keep trying, okay? So the last step would be to choose the solution to try. So have the teen choose the solution and then agree to a date when you can review that solution. So, this problem solving steps can really apply to a lot of different types of problems. It can apply to problems that you're having in your house right now in terms of getting schoolwork done, getting chores done, curfews, all of that stuff. It can also apply to problems that they come up with outside of your home that maybe don't have anything to do with your relationship with your child, but more problems that they're having with peers or getting homework done or trying out for a sports team or whatever it is, right? Being invited to a party they don't want to go to, or having disagreements with friends. This problem solving step could really be used for just about anything. It's really about stating your observation. So the observation might be you stating the problem, or it might just be you stating, hey, I noticed that you're looking pretty down, or I noticed that you haven't talked to Julie this week, or Julie hasn't been coming around, right? So when you state, I notice, that really opens up a huge amount of conversation right there, because you're stating, hi, like, I pay attention to you. I care enough about you to notice that something isn't happening that normally happens, or that you look down, right? That you don't look right, that you look upset, right? I care enough to notice that you haven't done the chores that you agreed to do. I care enough to notice that there's a problem. Yeah. And so again, like we talked about last week, when teens feel like you care about them, they're more likely to talk to you. They're more likely to cooperate and want to contribute to these conversations. So just by you saying, I notice, it can really open up the conversation. The other things about this problem solving steps is really about getting the teen to talk about what the problem is. So kind of identifying what the problem is if you don't really know yet. And then talking about their feelings so that you can validate. When you validate, then you're again opening up the conversation, right? And sometimes you don't have to share necessarily, you don't have to have a perspective on the problem if it's not your problem, right? So if it's not something that's affecting you, then you don't have to share your perspective or your feelings on it. For instance, if your daughter's best friend is Julie and they're in a fight and she's not coming around, you might have a conversation to help her solve that problem, just to open up the conversation. I noticed Julie isn't coming around lately. You know, what's happening? And then they might start talking to you about what a fight that they got into. Then you can ask about what the problem was and how they feel about it, right? Then you don't have to share how you feel because it's not your problem, right? But you can validate how they feel and thank them for sharing their feelings, right? And then you can ask them if they want help brainstorming for a solution or how to handle the situation. And at that point, they can decide, hey, I just needed to vent and it felt good to vent to my parent and get some understanding and validation out of it. Or, yeah, you know what? I'd like to solve this and I'd really like your help talking out some possible solutions. Okay. So when we're talking about solutions, I always like to point out that we want to focus on finding something that's going to feel like it's respectful to everybody involved. It's related to the issue. Sometimes the solutions that we come up with aren't necessarily related. For instance, let's see, I'm trying to think of an idea here. So for instance, your son didn't do the dishes, and then the solution you come up with to get them to do the dishes is you're not allowed to go out, right? You can't go to that party that you've been planning on going to for weeks. It's not related. And so we really want to make sure that the solutions we come up with are related to the problem at hand, and aren't just if us as parents are coming up with them, is not just a punishment hidden in disguise as a consequence for behavior or a solution, right? So make sure that it's reasonable, respectful, related, and that it's helpful. We want to make sure that we're teaching our children to choose solutions that can be helpful and respectful. And so when you're brainstorming, it's helpful to kind of go through the brainstormed list to see what solutions would meet these categories. And anything that doesn't, we just take it off the list and move on to the next thing. Now, I love the idea of focusing on solutions because it's a really good way to help our kids see that we're on their side and that we're not going to overreact and we're not going to punish. We're not going to be mad about a problem, right? And I like to use the word problem because I feel like everybody has problems and that most problems have solutions. So I feel like it's a very neutral way of discussing an issue that comes up. It's just a problem, and we'll work together to find a solution. So remember, when we involve our children, we get more cooperation, right? So when we're the ones who are taking control of the situation, you didn't do your chore, now you're grounded, or you're not pulling your weight around here, I'm going to take away your iPad. When it's just like, this is the problem and here's the solution I came up with as a parent, then it really doesn't help to gain that cooperation. We're not going to increase cooperation by taking control. But when we sit down and involve them in the problem solving process, then they're more willing to talk and they're more willing to cooperate with us as well. Because a lot of the problems that we deal with, let's be frank, are problems around the house, right? Problems that they're not being involved with the family, or that they're staying out too late, or that they're taking our cars, or using all the gas and not filling up the tank, or, so all of those types of problems are better solved together than us just making a new rule to deal with or punishing. I say this when I'm talking to parents of toddlers. We need to teach our children what to do instead of just stopping them from doing what we don't want them to do, right? So when our children are exhibiting a behavior that we don't like, what we often do is tell them what not to do. But we don't often brainstorm or talk about what to do instead. And so that's where we end up running into problem after problem after problem, because we haven't set them up to succeed. We've simply said, you can't do this. So then they'll try something else, and it may or may not work because they don't know the rules of the game, right? They're like little aliens sent down from another planet who don't know our customs or our rules or traditions. And so they're just experimenting on the fly, trying to figure it out. And, parents always say that the children come with a manual, but if we're being fair about it, the kids didn't get a manual either. So they're just really trying to figure it out. So the more that we can set them up for success by telling them what to do or involving them in figuring out what to do, then the easier it makes life for everybody. All right, so when we're making an agreement, and sometimes agreements don't start with problems, but often it does, right? So you'll see that these 4 steps for making an agreement, it's quite similar to problem solving, right? We're going to have a friendly discussion where everybody gets to voice their feelings and thoughts around an issue. And then we're going to brainstorm for some possible solutions and choose one that everybody can live with, and then agree to a specific timeline. So it's especially when we're talking about something that needs to get done or an expectation that needs to be met, having a deadline to the minute is very helpful. And then understand, we talked about this last week when we were talking about setting up chores and stuff, that understand that children, their priorities are simply different than us. So the deadline might not be met, and it's helpful if we have a plan for follow through in place already so that we can hold them accountable. If these steps don't promote successful agreement, start again from the top. And during step 2, you may discover the reasons, and then everybody will be given the opportunity to keep learning from mistakes. So yeah, when we're talking about learning from mistakes, I think it's really helpful to have that as a mindset, that we all make mistakes, and teens make a lot of mistakes. Do you remember being a teen? Right? We make a lot of mistakes when we're teenagers. And so it's helpful to look at those mistakes as opportunities to learn, right? And when we're in this mode of having open conversations and using the effective communication and being a real team player who's on their side to help them work through mistakes and learn from them, then they're more willing to share those mistakes with us. And again, it's really helpful if we model this, right? We are not perfect beings as parents. And it's really helpful if we're modeling the mistakes that we make as parents, and talking about them openly. Um, uh, I've worked. I have a friend who does a dinner time ritual, and they talk about the mistakes that they made that day at the dinner table. So every night when they sit down for dinner, they start their round. They go around the table, and everybody shares something good that happened to them that day, and then a mistake that they made, and if they learned anything from that mistake. So I thought that's a really nice way to just like let mistakes be okay in our house, right? Let kids know that that yeah, we're nobody's perfect. We're all imperfect. And one of my favorite quotes from the Positive Discipline program from Alfred Adler is really to have the courage to be imperfect. And I think that's really meaningful for parents, especially, right? If we can have the courage to show our kids that we're not perfect, then yeah, we're brave. So that felt like it went really speedily tonight, but gives us lots of time for discussion after the recording stops. But just a reminder that next week coming up, we're going to be meeting Wednesday night at 8 p.m. to talk about responding instead of reacting. This is going to be a great discussion. I'm really excited about it because so often as parents, we react without thinking. We are triggered, we are pushed, our buttons are pushed, and we move into that reacting place. And when we do that, we are not thinking about the long-term consequences of our action or the long-term effects of our response, our reaction. And it can be quite damaging to our relationship and to our ability to parent the way that we want to parent. So yeah, I think it's going to be a great conversation. I hope you can join me. Okay, have a great week.